everybody, it's Courtney and I'm back here with another video for Trinity stamps. Today we're going to be using the Sweeter Than stamp set, and this is a mini stamp set, but we are going to be creating kind of a different design, kind of like a circle design here. So I am using my Misty. It is best to use a stamp positioner for this. I'm starting off with this first lollipop here. I'm going to position that towards the top of my card panel, and this is a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to 5.5 by 4.25. Going to go ahead and ink that up with my blackout ink by Ink on 3 because we are going to be Copic coloring these. Going to go ahead and stamp that out, and then I'm going to rotate my card panel 180 degrees and then stamp that again. Next, we're going to take another lollipop here and we're going to position this off to the side. So kind of like an L shaped from the first lollipop. Going to make that as straight as I can, and I'm eyeballing this, but you can certainly measure it if that's easiest for you. Going to go ahead and stamp that out, and then once again, rotate my card panel 180 degrees and stamp that again. Now we have a huge gap between these first two lollipops. So we're going to go ahead and fill these in. Going to take one of the smaller lollipops and position that real close to that first one, but enough where I don't have to mask. You can mask if you want to fit in a whole bunch of these. You can certainly mask them and fit in a bunch, but I'm just avoiding the masking right now. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp that out. Again, rotate my card panel 180 degrees and stamp that again. Now, you can't rotate it again without repositioning your stamp unless you are using a square card panel, which I'm not. So I'm going to have to clean off my stamp, reposition this in these other little gaps here, stamp that, rotate my card panel 180 degrees and stamp that again. You will also want to make sure that your stamp is clean before you do this, unless you're working on a piece of acetate over your card panel, or else you might leave some smudges. Also, when you clean your stamp, you want to make sure that the stamp is actually dry. If you're using a stamp chamois, sometimes they tend to leave a little bit of water or dampness on the stamp, and you don't want to leave any smudges on your card panel. So moving on to this final lollipop here, just going to fill in this small little gap here, rotate my card panel, stamp that again, clean off my stamp, making sure that it is clean and dry before repositioning that in that last gap here that we have. Stamp that, rotate, stamp once again. Once I am happy with the position of all of my stamping, we are going to move on to the Copic coloring, and you can certainly use any coloring medium for this. You just might want to switch up your ink or your cardstock depending on what you plan on using. But I'm just going to show you one of each of the lollipops here. So I'm going to start off with this first one here, and this one is shaped, and I'm sure you've all seen these type of lollipops. They're kind of rolled. The way they make them, they're kind of rolled. So each one of these little sections or little spirals would be round. So each little section here would have a center highlight. So I am using 4 colors here, and I'm going right in with my darkest color because, let's face it, we don't have a whole lot of room to work with. And I'm just adding a shadow on either side of each one of those little sections. Now, you do not have to use 4 colors here. In fact, I had a hard time using 4 colors as well, but you'll see that my marker is almost straight up and down because I am just using the tip of the marker, barely touching the paper. Going to move on to the RV25 and extend those areas out just a teeny tiny bit. Now, if you do not feel comfortable using 4 colors and you plan on using 3 or even 2, just make sure they're contrasting enough where you're going to see that highlight. You want to make sure that you leave that highlight area because that is what's going to give the shape of the object, the highlight and the shadow. So if you only use 2 colors, make sure that they're not too close to one another as far as the contrast goes. Next, we're going to move on to the heart. I'm going to start off with my lightest color here because I have a larger area to work with. Going to get my paper saturated a little bit and kind of map out my darkest areas. Going in with the V09 and just adding a little bit of shading on the bottom and off towards the one side there. extending that out with the V17, then the V15, and then I'll finish off that highlight area with the color we started with, that V12, just for the highlight. Colored all of the heart ones the same exact way. And for these longer ones here, these are very similar to the first ones we colored in the fact that it has little sections. So again, going right in with my darkest color and adding just a little bit on either side of each one of these sections, as well as each one of the sections where they come together. That would also create a little bit of a shadow. Again, just using the tip of my marker, going to extend that out a little bit with the BG15. And here I'm leaving a pretty big highlight in the center because, again, this is what's going to give you that contrast and give you the shape of the object. Extending that out just a teeny tiny bit with the BG13, and then I will finish off with the highlight area for the BG11, and I'm quickly going over it. I don't want to blend it out too much. I want to make sure that I maintain that highlight. For the round lollipops here, these would be those flat ones that you get like at the doctor's office and stuff. So I'm not worried about these looking like a round object. So I'm just adding a little bit of shading in the center and kind of working my way up towards the sides and blending that out each and every time, finishing off with the G00 for my highlight just on the outer edges on the top portion of the lollipop. Once all of my coloring was done of the lollipops, I did fill in the lollipop sticks with just a C3, but I skipped that part because I didn't do any shading. I am going to add some white gel pen details here, going along with the shape of the object. I am kind of using those lines as a guide, and this will really give it some shape as well. So if your coloring is not the best, or you weren't able to get the contrast you're looking for, adding these little white gel pen details will really help out. So I did take a little bit off of this card panel on the top and bottom, and I think I took 1/4 of an inch off the top, 1/4 of an inch off the bottom, just so I can create a little bit of a border so it's not too much white space. Going to take a piece of black cardstock here, and this will be for my sentiment, and I am going to treat that with my anti-static tool, taking my sentiment from that same stamp set, stamping that with my very, very dirty Versamark ink pad here, which is a clear sticky ink, great for embossing. Going to sprinkle on some Hero Arts white embossing powder and heat set that with my heat gun, making sure that the heat gun is heated up for about 30 to 45 seconds before bringing that to the paper, and that will minimize your warping. Going to trim this down into a small, not really a strip, but I'm trimming the panel down, or my sentiment down, so that it's just a little bit larger than the sentiment itself. I don't want to cover up too much of my lollipops, but I want my sentiment to really pop. So I'm going to take that black cardstock as well, and in order to make these the right size, I'm trimming this down for one side to be 4 1/4 inches long, and then I am going to cut 2 strips that are roughly the same size, and they're about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to add these to the top and bottom to make it look as if this is layered without adding extra bulk to your card. So first I'm going to go ahead and adhere my card panel down to an A2 size top folding note card, and I'm trying to center this as much as I can so that the space I'm leaving on the top and bottom is roughly the same. I'm going to take these skinny little strips of the black cardstock, and I prefer to use wet glue for this because it gives you a couple of seconds to move it around and make sure that you have it positioned the way you want it. And I'm just going to tuck that right directly next to the bottom portion of my card panel so that I have a little bit of a border and still have some of that white card base showing. And this will just make it look as if I have a piece of black cardstock underneath it, but it's less bulky. And it's less cardstock to use. So I did that to the top and bottom, and then popped up my sentiment with my foam tape. But before adhering that, I added some shimmer to my lollipops. It's easiest to do this before you add your sentiment strip so you don't have to kind of work around it. And I am using a Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen just to add sparkle to each and every one of these little lollipops here. Once I had that done, I did go ahead and position my sentiment directly there in the center. And like I said, I just popped this up with some foam tape. And to add a little bit of extra dimension and a little bit extra shine, I did take some glossy accents to just the flat, I guess what would be the flat lollipop, so the hearts and the circles. And I squeeze a little bit of this out on a scrap piece of paper to make sure that there's no air bubbles before bringing this to my card panel. I outline the image first and then kind of fill in the rest and let that glossy accents spread out. It will dry completely clear. And that is it. That is the card for today. As always, I will leave a list of supplies in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.